Welcome back, everyone. We are launching our 5 p.m. talk with a very familiar face. Emy Chapleau just did the last presentation, but now will be joining us to talk about the impact of school esports programs on players' health and well-being in Quebec, Canada. Thank you, Emy. Take it away.
Well, hello everyone. So today I will again present you the multidisciplinary project research we made in our university about the impact of esports school program on students' health in Canada, more precisely in the province of Quebec. So this research was also done with the collaboration of Esports Federation in Quebec, which is the organization that started all the esports school program in our region. So over the last decade, esports have transformed from a simple recreative activity into a highly organized form of competition. Today, we see structured teams, school leagues, and even national tournaments. Research also shows that these programs can develop valuable transferable skills, such as teamwork, leadership, and communication, and can even serve as a protective factor for teenagers at risk of academic disengagement. Despite the growing popularity, major stereotypes still persist. First of all, esports is still not officially recognized as a sport in many regions, including in Canada. This means that many esports teams do not have access to the same resource and service as traditional sport teams. For example, some Canadian esports school teams don't even have the access to their own school gym. Esports are still perceived as an unhealthy and solidarity activities, and furthermore, many programs still remain underdeveloped due to limited government recognition and funding, which will also directly affect the creation of well-structured esport programs in our region. However, many players still want to be part of an organized team, which explains why several schools continue to establish their own esports program, even with limited resources. So as we can see, we have 38 schools in different CEGEP, 41 in high school, and 10 universities that also have their own esports program. However, the structure of this program and the service that will be offered to their player have not been measured yet in Quebec, which is exactly the two different objectives of our research. So the first one is to examine the potential impacts of esports programs on players' overall health and well-being, based on the benefits or risk of supervised or unsupervised esports program for a scientific literature. The second objective is then to measure what are the services that are provided to esports students athletes in this program in Quebec. We aim to combine evidence from scientific literature with observations from current local programs to propose practical recommendations for healthier and also a more effective esports environment. In short, as we already know, the impact of gaming is not determined by the activity itself, but more by its context and also how programs are structured and all how players are supported. So for this study, we combine two different techniques. So the first one is that we conduct a scoping review to synthesize the existing research on the health impacts of esports among teenager and young adults. We include only peer-reviewed studies published from 2010 in English and in French, focusing only on participants aged to 12 to 25, and they can still be involved in either a school-based program or professional esports context. We include these two contexts because we really want to see what are the most essential services that will help players' health. And second, we design and distribute a custom questionnaire that we made ourselves to send it to the coordinators of Quebec esports program. The goal was to identify what are the services that is currently offered to players. And together, these two methods allow us to map both the scientific evidence and the concrete realities of esports initiatives across Quebec. So for our sample, we have 4 different universities that respond to our questionnaire, 5 CEGEP, 12 high school, and 1 unspecified. So let's start with the result of our scoping review. In our analysis, we observed that professional esports players maintain a surprisingly balanced physical health profile. Studies indicate that these athletes engage in moderate to high levels of physical activities, often incorporating daily exercise sessions of about 1 hour per day. They also express positive attitude toward fitness, saying that it also helped them focus and managing stress and even preventing fatigue during competition. Furthermore, professional players spend roughly the same amount of time on screens as recreational gamers, but they are still more active and less sedentary. Their overall body composition and cardiorespiratory fitness are also comparable to other young adults in traditional sports. In short, as we can see, esports who are integrated into an organized and health-conscious environment can contribute positively to physical well-being and also the athletic development. However, our scoping review revealed a few problems that can occur in some esports school program, which can then have an impact on their players' health. So some school where also had a really well-structured program and have similar results to professional ones, and some have a less structured program which also have impacts on their health. It is also important to understand that some school esports programs lack physical health supervision or even the access to gym and training resource. School often help their traditional sports students, like their football teams, by providing different physical service. These can these can be the access to professional health or even sports therapists. However, some school programs don't provide the same structure to their esport teams, mostly in the region where esport is not considered a sport yet. So, like any other traditional sports, balancing studies with long training sessions can be hard. Esport players themselves need to balance their study with long gaming sessions, which often leads to both mental and physical fatigue, particularly in the absence of structured supervision. Some students even train less than 2 hours per week, which is below the recommended activity levels. So as we saw with the professionals esport athletes, sports really help preventing physical and cognitive fatigue. So if school program had better structured sports session for their players, it can really help prevent these risks. Students players also have a body mass index similar to their peers, but have a lower muscle mass and a higher visceral fat. They also frequently report pain in the back, wrist, and hands, mostly due to prolonged sitting and repetitive movement. These type of pains are also seen in professional esports players or even traditional school athletes. However, these athletes still have access to physiotherapists or even just better equipment normally, which will help prevent and treat these pains, which is sometimes not the case for esports school program. So for this section about the physical health program, we understand that esports teams who have access to a well-structured physical activity programs have a good general health, which can be acquired by an interdisciplinary support. However, a lack of supports, on the other hand, will contribute to fatigue and injury risk, underlying the need for more structured and supervised esports programs in school. For the mental health, so like every professional competitive sport, professional esport players will experience recurring stressors, such as performance stressors, interpersonal conflict, or even conflict with their own teammates, which can then cause long-term anxiety and fatigue. However, there is a huge difference between the structured and unstructured program on the player's mental health. So when players are supported by coach or mental health performance staff, they develop stronger coping strategies that enhance their emotional balance and also their overall well-being. Furthermore, social support also plays a protective role. As we can see in our research paper, a cohesive environment with access to psychological resources can help prevent burnout and also reduce the risk of problematic gaming behaviors. Studies that compare the esport athletes to traditional sports participants also show that their self-perception is relatively similar from the social, emotional, and cognitive points. Overall, the evidence that we saw in our scoping review suggests that applying a framework similar to traditional sports can minimize the risk while also promoting the mental health and resilience in esports players. For students player in school esports program, the psychological dimension is also highly dependent on the level of supervision. When esport programs include structured team environments, students benefit from strong social support network. With this kind of support, it also helps reduce the anxiety and the depressive symptoms that we can saw in them, while also fostering a better inclusion, motivation, and also a sense of belonging. However, as we already said, some school programs still lack holistic supervision. And without the access to trained professionals such as coach, psychologists, or even mental health performance consultants, students are more vulnerable to stress, fatigue, and also maladaptive habits. This absence of psychological supports can then lead to unhealthy behaviors, including emotional instability or even an excessive screen times, which is exactly the opposite of what we see with a well-structured and supervised programs, such as professional esports teams, or only school-based programs that have a good structure. For the mental health section, we understand that a structured and interdisciplinary models that support players' mental health and contribute to their well-being really help them maintaining a good lifestyle. However, non-structured models can cause problematic emotional regulation and also problematic behavior. For the sleep cycle, so in general, lifestyle plays a key role in players' well-being. Research shows that many sport athletes experience poor sleep quality, which is linked to anxiety and also late night training. Using screens before bed expose players to blue light, which will then slow down their metabolism production and also affect their own sleep schedule. This will lead to fatigue and also a reduced cognitive performance for the next day, which will also affect their own gaming performance. So, promoting better sleep hygiene and also a better mental regulation is therefore essential to support recovery and also long-term health in esports. For this section, we don't seems to have a really big difference between esports athlete or even professional esports. So maybe both of them still need better sleep quality and also a better sleep hygiene. And contrary to common belief, esports participation does not affect academic success. In fact, some research showed that students involved in esports study about 16.8 hours more per week than the casual gamers. They also maintain an average GPA of 3.23, which is similar or even slightly higher than the university norms. Structured esports program promotes mostly discipline, motivation, and perseverance, which are skills that support both academic and competitive performance. These are also skills that is developed in normal or even traditional sports program. Players also report they improve their focus and resilience, which is also positively influence their study. In short, an organized esports help build a good habits that will also support success in both the gaming career and in school. For our homemade questionnaire results, so the first thing we wanted to see was how many times esport players have access to physical training. These can be supervised training with a coach and the entire team together, or unsupervised training, such as only the access to the school gyms like any other traditional sport teams, where players can only go to the gyms whenever they have time. And as we can see, both supervised and unsupervised physical activities are mandatory from 0 to 2 hours per week, which is again below the recommended activity levels for maintaining a healthy fitness. These are really comparable to the result we found in our scoping review when they show the unsupervised program, which can cause risk to the health about the players. We also wanted to see what are the services that esport players have access. So the red color symbolizes that the esport teams don't have access to this service. The orange symbolizes that the team have access to the service, but only on demand. And the yellow color symbolizes that they have access to this service and it is obligatory. So as we can see, approximately 1/4 of the teams have access to a mental coach, which is relatively positive. but a few of them doesn't even have access, even on demand to this kind of service. Kinesiologist was way more popular than we thought, but physiotherapist, chiropractor, medical doctor, the sport therapist, and even nurse is still service that esports program lack right now, which is also essential service that they need to have for their physical and mental health in general. So as we explain again, some esports programs don't have the access to the same service than the traditional sport teams. And of course, the resources that are given will vary across different schools. Not every school have access to their own private physiotherapist, even for their own traditional sport teams. However, in Quebec, we have what we call the Sports Study Program, which is a program that helps schools support their students athlete by providing them professional health service, a structured competitive program, and even some equipment. So as we can see, the schools that have access to this exact program have access to medicine, physiotherapy, kinesiology, sport psychology, nutritionist, sport therapy, and even massage if they want. So to answer to the previous question, no, not every school has their own personal health services. However, schools that are part of these sports study programs have access to all these professional services for their players' health due to government funding. But esports team can't even have access to this program or can't even apply to it because again, esports is still not considered a sports in Canada. So if players that have access to these type of services, it's only because the school itself decided they want to provide this service to their esport teams. So in conclusion, we see that we need to implement better physical and psychological support for our esport players to improve their health and also their general well-being. Maybe we need also more mandatory physical activity program because it really helped them with their own performance in general and also their physical health. Maybe workshop on how to manage anxiety, sleep disorder, and also cyber addiction could be really useful also for them. And finally, our final result, but we need to provide access to the existing support service that are already there. It's not because it doesn't exist, they are here, but our esport teams doesn't have access to them because they are not considered sports. We then need to measure what are the real impact on the players' teams, which is in the second phase of our project that we're currently working right now. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emy. We do have a question for you in the chat. You mentioned that esports players adopt habits that help them perform better in school. Are these also habits that they transfer to the working world?
So actually, yes, I didn't mention in the presentation, but the study mentioned that these skills were transferable. So yes, in their study, but also in their general life and in their future, which also means that they still have these capacities in their work schedule.
Excellent. And that question also had a second part. We've seen in several other presentations that some of these issues have been highlighted, particularly that many esports players have sleep disorders. Since we know that this is a very common problem, why do you feel it is so undertreated?
Honestly, I think it's because we just don't apply what are the necessary measure for it. So normally, like every other students, esport players will have really late practice because they need to go to school every day, and after they go to their practice, which also means they pass a lot of time on screen, even while working on their computers only for their study. But we doesn't treat these. I think it's only because we doesn't accord a lot of importance to our esport players. I don't know what it is for the other countries, but in Quebec, our players really lack in general of workshop and just learning and everything that we need to provide them. But sleep disorders are also really common and we really need to address it more because it affects a lot of players.
Mhm. And I apologize if you covered this in your presentation and I missed it, but one question I had was about how GPA relates to students' kind of careers in the university. Here in the US, for instance, if students don't maintain a minimum GPA, they often lose access to federal funding. They might find it more difficult to get student loans, and they can definitely lose any scholarships they have for things like athletics or esports. Is that similar in Canada? And could that be part of why we see that relatively high GPA among the students that you were looking at?
In Canada, it's actually really different than in the US. So first, our school program and just even the number of money that we need to put to entrance in the university is way lower than in what we see in America. I know that there's some school that needs thousands of dollars only to enter a specific program for one session. In Canada, it's mostly 2,000 per session, which is really low. So not a lot of esports students have a scholarship, but they still maintain a high GPA, which I think it's maybe because they just learn new skills such as how to have a good work schedules, how to still be more motivated, more disciplined, which can then be as transferable skills to their own grade, school grades. So I think it's more maybe a form of internal motivation.
That's actually nice to hear. As we know,
Really nice.
internal motivations tend to have longer term effects than
Yes,
external motivations.
absolutely.
Um, I am not seeing any other questions in the chat, but you do still have a little bit of time left. Are there any final points you want to leave us with about this research?
Well, the second part, we will really measure exactly the impact of these different services among players. So we will follow different esports players from approximately 1 year and see what are good supervised program on the impact and their impact on the physical and psychological health, and on supervised program, what are also the impact on physical and psychological health. So I really can't wait to show you these next results that will mostly appear next year or in 2 years to see what will be the following of esports programming in Quebec. And thanks a lot for letting me present this research. I hope you liked it, and I can't wait to see the other presentation and compare them to other studies as well.
Yes, we're definitely looking forward to seeing the future results of this research, perhaps next year in Japan when we host the conference there. Thank you so much, Emy. We are going to take a quick break, and then we will be back at 5:30 Eastern with our final MSU hosted presentation for the day.